Hi, everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Flynn. I'm very happy to be hosting today. It's a rainy, dreary, sad day in Sydney, so it's good to be all warmed up with something to do inside and hang out with you guys. Please let us know if you are watching live, maybe where you're tuning in from. I'm from Sydney, Australia, and so is Jeremy Lord, our illustrator, who I'll jump on in just a sec. I can see Mickey. I almost thought Mickey Minaj, and I was like, what? But Mickey is in chat there, and someone from Columbus as well. Anybody know if they're using Photoshop or Photoshop Beta? We'll be using Photoshop, just a regular old Photoshop, so it's not necessarily any of the beta techniques that we use today. So any Photoshop, you should be able to handle most of these tasks. But anyway, without further ado, Jeremy Lord, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Yo, good to be here. I'm pretty good actually. Got a rainy day, trying to entertain a puppy. Doing some drawing. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. What do you do with a puppy when it's been raining outside? They just like claw at the door and that's it?
Basically, you might hear some barking on the stream today. But yeah, we'll hopefully we'll be good. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay, cool. Well, very good. And Valadair as well from Brazil. Nice to have you in chat as well. I know Dark Hours is helping us out too. So if you have any questions while we're going live, this is your first time here. It's an interactive stream. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to throw them in chat. This is aimed at beginners, I think, Jeremy, and then you're going to take us through. Actually, I'll let you explain what we're up to today and tomorrow.
Yeah. So this is me. Basically, this is some of my work. I like to kind of play with different styles, different techniques, all within the kind of the same themes. But yeah, using kind of different ideas and different principles and techniques in Photoshop. So what I thought I would do over today's stream and tomorrow's stream, so we got another episode tomorrow where I'll be going through another couple of techniques, is showcase some of the techniques with kind of Photoshop tips attached to kind of get kind of different styles of illustration. So this is basically, it's beginner friendly in the sense of like you're using Photoshop to do this. Nothing that we're going to do is particularly advanced from a Photoshop level. And the question earlier as to whether like this are we using beta or not, like we could probably do what we're going to do today and tomorrow actually using like Photoshop 3 or something. This is like really, really basic core stuff.
Right.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus more on illustration techniques and principles. So like, think about this before you do that kind of thing. And here's how you would set up this particular artwork to do this and manipulate it later. And so in that sense, it's going to be a little bit more advanced. But we're not going to be talking about kind of drawing skills here and proportions and that sort of stuff. So I guess, yeah, inherently these two kind of sessions and tomorrow's sessions as well are more for like, once you are comfortable with your drawing skills, here's where you can go with it, basically.
Right.
If that makes sense. And here's some of the stuff that you can mess around with and play to get kind of different looks and using different techniques and tools in Photoshop. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. And as I said, why am I getting away from my mic? As I said, any questions, throw them in chat because we'll try to solve them live. It's always fun. Or if something doesn't make sense, let us know. It's always good. Sometimes Jeremy can go quick as well and like go over a step that he just knows instinctively. So we'll try to catch that too, just to make sure that you can follow along.
Yeah.
Muscle memory of shortcuts can get to solve.
A little bit like that. I'll just press a button and be like, everybody knows this, right? All right. So let me do kind of like a bit of a spoiler here and kind of show you where this is going. So
wow, that was easy.
Yeah, done. We're done. Thanks, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. Okay, so what this is basically kind of like, it's a very graphic, flat style. Does not require much kind of like painterly training. Obviously, the line work is doing all the heavy lifting here, and the colors are flat. It's very kind of animation. It's very like stylized kind of look and feel. But there's a few things to kind of know and kind of think about beforehand before you launch into something like this Otherwise, you might kind of look at this and go like, oh, this is pretty simple. I can do this. But you might get a little bit frustrated if you're not sort of following certain of the guidelines that I'll kind of cover today. So let's get back down to just our sketch. So everything always that I will do will basically kind of start with a rough sketch. This is your roadmap, I think. This is your thing to like know where you're going and how to progress with that. I always kind of use this analogy that Photoshop is basically Photoshop is like a super powered sports car. But you still need to know where you're going and how to drive and all those kinds of things. So this basic kind of like sketch is your roadmap. So then you can get in your Lamborghini and get where you're going fast. But you need this kind of destination
right
at the start to get there. So whatever kind of style I'm working with, I will always start with a basic sketch. That's just kind of like drawing and illustration foundations, kind of 101. But from here, I am going to start kind of getting into my inking. So you can see I've got my inking on a separate layer here. And this is basically kind of following a similar process to what you would do if you were kind of doing this analog. So I'm just going to make a new layer. I'm going to call this inks. And we can kind of start getting into this. So to begin with, I'm just going to use black with this. I can potentially change those colors later on depending on the kind of style that I want. And I'm also going to only use 3 colors plus 1 highlight for the main kind of work. Again, I want that sort of like graphic look. This is important. If I start putting in too many gradients or too many colors, we're not going to get there. We can talk about that a little bit further on once we've kind of finished this. So I'm going to show you guys the kind of the basics of this inking process, and then we'll jump ahead. Otherwise, like there's no way I'll be able to kind of finish this in like 20-25 minutes. So we'll kind of skip ahead a little bit once we've kind of nailed down like, all right, here's how you do this step. Just now take the time to kind of do it over and over again. All right. So first things first is obviously I need to use my brush. All right, so my paintbrush is over here. Just a classic brush tool will do just fine. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger, just because again, I want something that's quite thick. I want something that's quite graphic. The point of this is not realism, right? The point of this is something that feels very kind of cartoony, very kind of strong, bold line work, and gets that kind of graphic vibe to it. So I'm going to make sure that my brush is on one of the basic kind of brush, which I've got here, which is this kind of round inking brush. I've called it this. If you're curious in terms of how to do this, you should have something like this by default in your Photoshop. If you don't, one of the easiest ways to get something like this is if you start with just a basic round brush like this. So you can see my my thumbnail of my stroke here is just kind of like literally just doing like one color, no kind of fanciness. This is what you get with a mouse. I'm using a drawing tablet, by the way. This is crucial for basically everything that I'm going to do over the next couple of days to be able to get that kind of pressure sensitivity. But the main thing we want to do is go into our shape dynamics in our brush settings and tick shape dynamics, change the size jitter to pen pressure. And that's going to give my stroke this kind of profile of if I'm pressing down lightly, it'll be thin. If I press down hard, it'll be thick. So that's going to be crucial for me to get this kind of more natural kind of inking process going on this. All right, so now I'm ready to go. I'm going to drop the opacity of this layer so I can kind of see what I'm doing a little bit more, and we can kind of start inking. So the basic kind of idea here is the ends of your strokes are going to be kind of tapered, so they're going to be quite thin, and the top of the kind of the main part of your strokes are going to be a little bit thicker. Right? I've also got smoothing on up here, so I usually keep it around sort of 25 to 30% depending on. This just means that my strokes get a little bit kind of cleaner, a little bit more, again, that kind of graphic thing, less kind of organic and sketchy and like, traditional kind of comic book inking. So we want that kind of graphic style. So we're going to work with this kind of nice, kind of thick line there.
Makes it like a bit, if you're after that kind of sharper lines, and also like a bit more of that vector kind of look, like when you're doing your outlines and things like that.
Exactly, yeah. And actually, this kind of style does lend itself often to these questions of like, why don't you just do this in Illustrator?
Right.
And it's absolutely a fair point. The main reason I don't do this in Illustrator is because I prefer to do it in Photoshop. That's it. There's no kind of like, it would probably be more efficient and maybe easier for me to do this in Illustrator. But I'm not necessarily doing this to be efficient. I'm doing this to enjoy it. And so, yeah, I just use Photoshop. It just feels a bit more natural. But there are certain things like this kind of stuff that can happen. So what you can do on these kind of lines is you can do what's called cutting back, which is a standard kind of inking technique if you want these sharp lines. So once the line is created, you come back with an eraser and you cut back into it to get a really nice kind of sharp kind of finish on that line. So you can do that as you go through. Sorry. But again, if you were doing this in Illustrator, you probably wouldn't need to do this because you would just set your brush to those settings. Right. So once we've kind of gone a little bit further with this, let me just kind of quickly and roughly get some more of these kind of strokes in here. And I can kind of talk about some of the kind of the founding principles of this very kind of graphic technique and how it works and what are the things that you should look out for when you're trying this yourself. So again, I'm just going pretty quickly here, trying to get these kind of details. Obviously, if I was doing this not to a particular time constraint, I would do this a little bit more cleanly and take my time with it. And clean is important here, right? So anything like this or that are kind of unfinished and that kind of vibe, you absolutely do want to make sure those things are nice and clean and evened out. Again, because we're after this kind of vector look and something that's going to be nice and clean and even throughout, those things might seem small, but all around your drawing, they're going to start compounding together, and they're going to start making your drawing look like it's a little bit more organic and less graphic.
Yeah.
So those things are absolutely important to look after. But we're starting to kind of see the shape here. So one of the main ideas of this style is, you see this line here that I've kind of drawn. It's the same thickness as my outside kind of contour line. That's a bit of a no-no when you're doing this. So the basic gist here, if you want something that's going to appear to be relatively clear, so we want to be able to see the volumes, we want to be able to see the shapes, things that are in front of other things, what's standing out, and not this kind of like mess of everything is the same line. I can't really read this image too well. It's really important to vary your line weight. And the general rule for that is anything that defines a big shape needs to be thicker. All right, so let's erase this line real quick. So the edge of this bowl is like a main shape for me. All right, same with this arm over here, and the hand and the foot. Like, these are the main kind of blocks of this, and you want to be kind of, I guess, a little bit choosy about how you work these, and kind of careful how you do them. So the idea basically is this. Here, I'm going to get quite thick all along the outside of the stroke, and that's going to give me a little bit more kind of importance. Thicker lines draw your eyes in a little bit more, draw the attention back to them, and allow you to just kind of define that shape a little bit more. And then inside, is just going to be detail stuff, right? So that's going to be like, let's say, like here I've got this kind of like, it looks like a little bit of like a robot kind of mecha soul kind of bowl. I've got those details on a smaller kind of line weight. So these lines in here are going to need to be a little bit smaller. So anything that I put in here, whether, I don't know, like maybe there starts to be some kind of decoration elements kind of happening on there, all those things need to be thinner than your contour stroke. Because otherwise, if you have them be the same weight, they're going to start to compete and your drawing's going to be this kind of hot mess of line work, and you're not going to be able to see kind of that shape more clearly. So that's quite crucial to do. And again, same thing here, right? So I can get a little bit more kind of weight on that leg because it's in front of the arm. It's kind of one of the things that's the closest to us. But these two lines that are kind of just detail, they're just kind of stuff happening in there, they will remain that same weight. So
and would you normally do it in the way that you do all the lines the same and then you come back in and then thicken the lines up? Or do you do them thick as you go?
You can try and do it as you go. I find it's easier to just kind of work in this way, get all the line work to kind of look the way you want it, and then go in and thicken it up where you want. One of the other things that I'm kind of doing here, you can see, is on this kind of shape. Like this is a big kind of shape over here. This kind of section right there, there's this like one line there and then another one here. So there's going to be some interesting things that are going to happen here where I need to think about, do I want to lock this foot up in that same kind of thickness line, or do I want to come in and just kind of do a tapered thickness where it goes from the thickness that I have on this particular stroke to the thickness that I have on this one, right? So it's going to taper out and just become a little bit thinner. So I can kind of fix that up a little bit more if I want to. And that's going to give me, again, a little bit more kind of control on that. So this is where I think it's probably easier. Sorry, I keep pressing escape to muscle memory to go out of my rotation tool. And it brings up the floating meeting controls.
They don't show up on our side, by the way, just in case you're wondering.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
It's just a you annoyance.
Yep. So that's basically the kind of the principle that I will be kind of following throughout this now, is going around these contour lines, thickening them up as I need to be. They don't need to necessarily be super uniform. This is where, again, maybe Illustrator would be a little bit more helpful or a little bit more efficient, because you could set a line like a stroke weight and then you could have the same weight across everything. Right. So if you are really kind of going for that kind of graphic style, that's going to be kind of important. The sort of the creative decisions that happen here happen kind of when we're talking about this section here now. All right, so we've got kind of a lot of detail here. So far, we've done stuff that's like main blocks, not heaps going on, pretty easy to kind of register. Here, we've got a hell of a lot going on. So how do we kind of define this? So I could kind of apply the same rule here and go, all right, well, the noodles are a contour. So I'm going to apply a really thick stroke to the outside of those noodles. And then I've got stuff over here and then stuff over there. And then the egg is also a shape. So I'm going to do that as well. And then I've got this kind of seaweed. But that's going to start again being a little bit too messy. So here I need to kind of maybe do a little bit of trial and error and see kind of what's going to allow me to get this legibility and this kind of style that I want a little bit more. So I might start thick and taper off as I go. And that's going to give me the detail that I want, because now we're doing kind of inside detail on this illustration, all the while keeping the volume and everything else intact. So this would probably take me a few kind of goes to get like, where do I want the thick strokes? Where do I want the thin strokes? And so on and so forth. So there's definitely a little bit of trial and error going on here. But it's kind of one of the joys, I think, of kind of working with this style, is getting that sort of graphic look, but also making sure that your image balance is still kind of legible and relatively easy to read.
We had a question from chat, actually. What inspired this character design?
Well, we're just coming out of winter here, and I do love me a good ramen bowl. And I just felt like kind of messing around with this style, and it's just kind of like came out of this kind of idea of like a little Super Mario character kind of ramen bowl.
Yeah, it's a bit like Kirby. The eyes are very Kirby.
Yeah, and again, like these eyes actually, I messed around with these eyes quite a bit, trying to decide like, you know, do I want it to be like kind of a little bit more anime, kind of chibi, like what's the kind of the look and feel of this kind of character, and how does he kind of interact with stuff? You know, like there's a range of different things that you could do here in terms of style that could apply here. So a little bit of trial and error, but yeah, basically just kind of looking at like, oh, I like ramen, so I'm going to try and do this kind of illustration in that way.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, the basic gist of this is, like I said, is contour strokes, main shape strokes block out those shapes and they get really nice and thick. And then inner strokes, anything that's kind of just inner detail, stays a little bit thinner so that your image has a good amount of like line weight and variety to work with. And the end result is this, right? So you can see I have kind of made some of the other strokes a little bit thicker. I've played around with kind of different ideas, given it a little bit of a motion kind of thing. So that's just like a little bit of an anime trick where you can start kind of erasing things and kind of, you know, making that line kind of bleed out.
Oh, cool.
And making it look like the legs kind of moving a little bit.
Yeah. It's pretty quick to add that little effect then too.
Yeah, yeah. And like, again, like this is literally just like, I think in the past it would have just been a simple kind of like do these kinds of things.
Right.
Which, you know, works as well. But I find that the anime thing of actually kind of like breaking down that line and kind of showing that and erasing into it and then coming out on the other side a little bit more, just kind of achieves that a little bit more of just kind of this kind of sense of motion.
Yeah, it's cool.
So yeah, so you can kind of see like what's going on here. Potentially looking at this and kind of blurring my eyes, maybe these chopsticks need to have a little bit more thickness to them so that they stand out from the leg that they're in front of. So again, it's all about like the information imparting on that person. That's better, I think. That's a lot better than what it was before, which is this. That chopsticks kind of get lost. If I bring that forward again, you can see they kind of pop out a little bit more from the leg that's behind it.
And that kind of composition thing, that's why you said, oh, I might blur my eyes a little bit, or zooming in and zooming out to get the whole kind of composition. That these are the sorts of things that you do. Yeah.
Like zooming out to see, like, is this still readable? Like, can I still see what's going on here? Is it a hot mess? There's a lot of stuff going on the top kind of section of this image. So making sure that that line weight kind of imparts the information you need it to impart is what this kind of technique is all about. So that's basically it. Right? So that's the inking. Got a lot of kind of line thickness going on here, but it's still quite graphic. And I'm quite happy with how that's kind of turned out and kind of going into it. So now it's time to apply some color. And the cool thing about this technique is that we can start to kind of play around with these thick strokes to get a nice kind of inside color without having to really kind of fill in the line work a little bit too much and kind of be a little bit too clean. There's a couple of ways I do this. So let me just make a new group here. I'm going to call this one colors 2, just so that we got a little bit more clarity. So I've got these ones in here. So basically you can see my setup here is discarding the shadow. I've got a base color. That's basically everything. right? That's the whole entire shape. Everything that's going to get color will get this particular thing, right? Then I've got the shading. So that's just kind of decide on a light source, decide on like understand the shape. Then I've got a highlight, and then just for extra kind of detail, I cheat and I add a fourth color, which is a little bit of a rim light. So all of these things are happening underneath that. So those are my four main kind of colors in here. So let me make a new layer, and two ways to do this. The kind of the slower way is using the lasso tool. So using the lasso tool, I'm just going to go on the inside of the stroke. And because the stroke is quite thick, I've got a lot of bit of freedom here to be a little bit more messy.
Right.
And nobody will know. So I can just kind of go in here and make a selection and then pick a color. I had this kind of like, I dropped that color that I had. Just a pink color. And then I use the command shortcuts to fill. Option or Alt Delete fills with your foreground. Or if I swap to a different color on the background, Command or Control Delete fills with your background color. So that's what I use basically whenever I'm kind of doing this. It's just a little bit faster than going to your fill or any of those kinds of things. So I will sometimes do this. Other times where there's a little bit more kind of line work to be had, I will come in first with a thick brush and thicken up that kind of range that I've got, and then come in with the lasso tool, and I can be even a little bit less careful. Or, and this is a little bit of a Photoshop hack, one of the issues with using the paint bucket, which would make sense, right, to kind of just click on the paint bucket and do that kind of thing. So make a little bit of a shape here, close it off, and then fill that with the paint bucket tool to get this. But the paint bucket, because I'm working with these kind of pixels, it always kind of leaves this little bit of a kind of a line inside, which isn't great. So one of the ways you can avoid that, if you're not kind of comfortable using the lasso tool, is you can actually use the pencil tool in Photoshop, which is this one, which is incidentally also, if you've ever watched any of my pixel art tutorials that we've done, this is the tool that we use to do this. And the difference here is, if you can see my stroke here using the regular brush, we've got these like 5 pixels that are just kind of a bit of a gradient from this pink to the white. And that's Photoshop trying to smooth down this image, so it kind of just blurs it just a little bit. Whereas the pencil tool is this super harsh, like it's pink, it's not. There's no gradient, there's no softness there. So from a distance, it looks a little bit kind of crunchy and a little bit horrible. But what's cool about this particular thing is if I go in here, if I draw in here, we won't see behind the black outline. And then if I use my paint bucket tool to fill that in, I don't actually get that because there is no gradient.
Right.
So the paint bucket goes right to the edge and fills it properly. So that's one of the ways that you can kind of do this really quickly. Either use the lasso tool and fill it in, or just use the pencil tool and then you can just go in with your paint bucket and fill that in accordingly.
Nice. Yeah. Cool.
Cool. So that's the kind of the basic scenario with this, with my color choices, and going into this. So if I peel this back into here, so this shading layer is this kind of like purple. So generally, as a general color guide rule, shadows tend to veer towards bluer tones. They're cooler. There's not as much light in there. So your shadows will kind of tend to go towards a bit of a blue color. One of the things you would probably want to avoid doing is, let's say I'm gonna select this or this, and I'm gonna fill that with black. which you can do if you're going for like super graphic kind of, everything is black and including the shading is black. But don't just make it black and then drop the opacity down. You don't get the same kind of richness and depth of that tone. Adding black to put in shading is rarely ever kind of something that's going to work well for this sort of thing. So you want to always give it a little bit of a tone. Whether that is something that's going to be like, let's say, I don't know, like let's go in and colorize this. I'm going to lighten it up. We can make this a warm tone if you want, right? So this is just kind of like it's a hot sunset day kind of thing, and we want those shadows, so we can keep those shadows kind of on the hot side. Or we can go into the blues and bring in a little bit more contrast and coolness into there. In this instance, I've gone with this kind of like a purpley tone to get a bit of a softer lighting kind of effect. But yeah, I think the general tip here is avoid just going in with like, I've got a color, add black, we've got a shadow.
Yeah.
In a similar way, I've got a color, add white, I've got a highlight. Also generally not the best way to work here.
Is it just because you're like, it's just less colorful, or like, what's the reason for that? Does it just like take over you've got all this black shadow and therefore it just kind of makes everything really dull?
Yeah. So the thing is, it's a color kind of theory thing that was kind of, I guess, laid down mostly by the Impressionist painter movement. Where if you look at like close up at like a painting from Monet or something, like you'll see everything is a color. Like the shading is like purple, the shadows are purple, the light is yellow. There really is kind of no such thing as like black shading and white light. Everything is kind of like a little bit of a color. So even if you just kind of take that like white, like if I made this, for instance, just this kind of like pale, like super white, and then drop the opacity, then I've got, like, oh, that reads as a highlight, but it doesn't look quite right. It looks a little bit kind of cold. It's just this light pink. It's not really the same thing as this. And the reasoning here is this tone and that tone are both on the warm side of the color spectrum, right? So I've got a little bit of kind of warmth there, and then I'm flipping it with something a little bit cooler, like this kind of deep purple that just kind of contrasts the lighting a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, and that's a good question that you're asking, because this is kind of like basic kind of color foundation. If I went back into a warm light on this rim light, so the rim light is there to give us a little bit of extra detail, right? So we've got our main light coming in from over here, and it's casting a light and it's doing all the shadows. But just to give it a little bit of extra volume, we do what's called a rim light. And that's basically like if we've got a sphere like this, we can just kind of come in with some like highlights on one side and just kind of shade that, give it a nice kind of glow, and then gives it a bit of a sense of like, all right, we've got some volume happening. But if I come in with another bounce light down here, all of a sudden that ball kind of has a little bit more kind of 3D element to it. So the rim light is just there for this idea of like, let's get a little bit more volume in there. But the color choice is also on the cold side, because if I went in and made this warm again, on my rim light, you'll see that it starts to get a little bit muddled and confusing as to what's the difference in between the regular light, this kind of yellow, and my rim light. Like I can't really see what's going on as much with it. Even if I made it this kind of like hot pink, like it still kind of works, but you don't really get the same level of detail. The image doesn't read as clearly as if it's this blue. That's a good kind of contrast to get the warms and the cools on the same kind of side as there is there.
Cool.
So that's our basic kind of lighting techniques and kind of how to fill those. And then it's basically just about kind of dressing this piece up a little bit. So let's put a little bit of a background color in this. Normally I would mess around with this and go like, all right, what works here? What's kind of cool? Like this works. Maybe gives it a little bit of like, where does the blue light come from? That makes sense, but it's not kind of really popping as much. So there's a lot of trial and error for me there. And I also want a little bit of a context or something, some type to go in there to give it that kind of graphic text. So I've added just the word ramen in Japanese 3 times to this in this like super neon kind of green color. Because I don't have anything even remotely similar to this in my piece, that's just going to make that kind of piece pop out a little bit more. And then finally, to make it, because all this can start to be a little bit flat potentially, I will take all of my layers here. So all of this gets selected. It then gets a Command Option Shift E. And what that does, is actually, I don't want to do that. That would have taken the entire image. I don't want that. I just want those. So I'm going to Command J, duplicate, and then Command E, and that's going to merge them down. So all that's done basically is it's taken all of my layers, all of my ramen layers, and made them into a single layer to basically then use this as a shadow. Right? So once that's done, I can lock the transparency of that layer up here. Also, shortcut on your keyboard for locking transparency is /. So you can see that little padlock comes up right there. That means it's locked. And then I can go in and pick a kind of like again, not black, anything but black, but like a dark blue. And then Option Delete will fill that layer and then drop the opacity down. And I've created basically kind of like a shadow. I'm going to increase the size of this up a little bit more. And now what that does is it kind of just makes this ramen bowl kind of pop out from its background. It's casting a shadow. It gives it a little bit more volume. It just reads the image a little bit more kind of clearly and just brings it out a little bit from its background again. So that's basically it. That's basically this kind of very graphic illustration technique that I use quite often, but there's just those little kind of things that need to be kind of thought of. And in terms of the line work is doing most of the heavy lifting. And because we've got limited colors, the color choice is also really important.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I love the drop shadow tip as well, because it's often find that a bit difficult, especially when I make like kind of complicated shapes and things like that. And it always adds like depth, right? So now it's
always,
even though we know they're basically jumping through the sky and there's nothing there's no shadow on the ground there, but at least you've got this shadow against the kind of type in the wall. So it's like they're flying through the sky. It's got like a very manga kind of anime kind of feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the idea, right? That's the whole point of this kind of vibe. And then last tip before we move on to the next one is something else that you can do, which it changes the kind of the style and vibe of this a little bit, but it's a fun thing to do, I find, and just give it this kind of like celluloid vibe, is I'm going to duplicate my inking layer where all my black inking is. I'm going to drag this one underneath, and I'm actually going to go into my filter, blur, and apply a Gaussian blur to this, and just a little bit of blur on that outline. And then we can drop the opacity down a little bit. And what it does is it just kind of gives it a little bit of like, it's like printed on like a plastic or something.
Yeah.
It's a cool effect that I sometimes will work with. Just to increase the kind of like just a little bit of a different style happening in there. It just gives it that kind of an edge. If you look at, where are we? If you look at this one, for instance, you can see that in full swing, where that kind of blur has been applied to the image. We won't really be able to see it too much because it's live, but there's just a little bit of blur and it just kind of gives it a little bit of that kind of celluloid vibe, which is kind of cool. So that's definitely something that you can kind of mess around with on that.
That's cool.
But that's it for that one. Let's move on to this next technique, which is kind of like, this has got kind of like Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of illustration vibes. This again is super graphic. We are using the polygon lasso tool almost exclusively for this. There's no line work involved, which one of the cool things about this is you don't really need a tablet. You can do this with a mouse. And in fact, it might even be easier to do this with a mouse because you won't get kind of so like double clicky and kind of fill out your lines as much. But this very kind of graphic style is really cool. And again, you could do this in Illustrator as well. I prefer kind of working in Photoshop for this. I got a little bit more immediate control. So yeah, that's what we're kind of going to do. Nice. But for this, we're going to work from a photograph. And this is the kind of the end result that we're looking at, right? So we've got a super kind of stylized, very kind of graphic version of kind of Kobe Bryant getting ready to do a massive slam dunk. And everything is like, again, quite basic in the colors. We haven't messed around with the colors too much here. We've kept them pretty real. But the shape language is what's really important here. Everything is very graphic. It looks like it's been cut out. And there's a few different ways to achieve this. So the first thing that we're going to do is, let me turn this off. I've got a sketch here that you can see I've done. I've actually traced this, right? So again, kind of skipping the whole like, oh, this is how you draw proportions and blah, blah, blah. I've actually just gone in and traced it to give myself a little bit more kind of focus on the stylization part of this, which is important. So this is my reference image. And before kind of getting into this, I've actually gone into my filter, liquify, and I have edited this a little bit because I'm looking for something that's going to be quite graphic, quite exaggerated in its pose. So there's a very dynamic pose. There's a lot happening in this drawing, in this photograph, sorry. So I want to kind of increase that. I want to increase the twist in his torso. So I'm going to drag, is like literally just liquefying this down. So just get a little bit more kind of interest and kind of graphic elements in here. Just to like make his head a little bit smaller maybe as well. So again, increasing that perspective, that's probably a little bit much, but we can kind of edit this as we need to a little bit more. But the point is, I'm going to make something that's quite stylized. So I want my photo that I'm going to trace to also be stylized. So I've prepared this. This is the OG and this is the edited version. So you can kind of see that just a little bit more kind of bend in his body, a little bit more kind of exaggeration on the length of his limbs, giving us this kind of like almost like a fisheye perspective.
Yeah.
And then my sketch, you can see I've literally just traced that photograph. So that's just a matter of me kind of placing that in the image and just dropping the opacity and then just tracing over it. I'm trying to like lay it back in on top of it so you can kind of proof that I've actually traced this. So that's my basic sketch. Literally just traced over that image and that's all good. So now I can kind of bring this back up to here, make it smaller. We're going to use this as a bit of a reference guide going into this as well. So in order to know where the shading is here, there's a couple of things you could do. You could just launch straight in and just go to town on this. That might be a little bit daunting. It might be a little bit tricky to kind of get correct. So what I can do is I can use Photoshop to my advantage and kind of apply a few effects to this. That's going to give me a little bit more information. So first one is I'm going to apply a convert to smart object on this, and I am going to desaturate this image. So I just want it to be black and white. All right? I just literally just want lighting information, no color as of yet. And I'm going to go to filter, filter gallery. There we go. I'm going to go to artistic and cut out. There we go.
Right.
So this cutout filter is going to flatten those shapes into something that's almost exactly what I'm already doing with this image, right? So this information is going to be quite handy for me to use. I can control the number of levels and detail in this. So I probably want a few kind of fewer detail or fewer levels. Edge simplicity goes from like very, very detailed to really, really super graphic, which again can lead to some interesting things that you might not have thought of before, like the way it's done the shoes here, which is just two kind of weird triangles. Like that could be fun. Like we're losing a lot of detail, but you know, again, it might give you some ideas. So kind of playing around with these sliders can be super, super fun. So obviously what I don't want is edge fidelity and simplicity down, because then it's just photographic. I want something a little bit more stylized. So I want to kind of like a happy medium of like, there, maybe that's not too bad. And that can be basically my guide going into this. And then I'm literally just going to work the same way that I did previously. So I've got a base layer, right? And that base layer, I'm going to kind of work in a particularly kind of stylized way as well. So that's just a matter of me going in and saying, all right, cool, let's make a new layer. Use my polygon lasso tool. I've got my color palette up here. I'm going to take this kind of skin tone. And now the tricky kind of creative side of this is making sure that you're a little bit ruthless with your detail. Right? So I'm doing all these folds here and kind of getting these shoes in. But what I don't want, and maybe I'll swap over to the basketball and explain this a little bit more clearly, make a bit more sense. What I don't want to do is, like on this basketball, for instance, like if I start making too many segments, then I lose the whole point of this style.
Yeah.
Because then it's no longer this kind of graphic straight edge style. So I need to find a happy medium again of like, I need some detail, but I also want this to be very graphic and very quick. So the way that I do this is just go fast. Don't have time to worry about detail. Don't mess around with like too much kind of like, oh, what's this and what's that? Oh, that's not how you draw a knee. Just go really, really fast here and just be rough with it. And you'll get this really kind of cool graphic style, like these fingers here, just kind of using my sketch as a guide to get that kind of going. And you'll get a much better result if, again, what you're going for is this kind of stylized look. And not everything needs to make sense. And in fact, one of the things that's cool with this is messing around with some extra kind of graphic shapes, like maybe some sense of like, again, some motion or something coming off of him because he's going quite fast. So we can kind of start adding in these weird kind of shapes going in.
Yeah.
Because again, we want that kind of graphic style, right? And we want it to be hyper stylized and really get a sense of like this kind of graphic kind of thing. So I'm pretty happy with that style. Again, that basic thing. And this is what I love about this. Like this is just a finger there. And it totally reads as such when you look at the larger picture, but it's really, really graphic.
Yeah.
And so getting into too much detail in here just ruins this completely.
It's cool. It's just a triangle.
Yeah. And again, that's the point, right? We're trying to get this like hyper graphic kind of vibe going on. So let me rename this base. We've got a few minutes left, so we should be pretty good. And what I'm going to do now basically is I'm going to work with layers that are going to be clipping layers. So make a new layer on top of this base. Hold down Option or Alt as you hover in between your two layers. And you get this like icon that shows up. This layer is now a clipping layer to the one underneath it. So let me pick a kind of a yellow. I could also go back to my original photo here and just kind of eyedrop those for fidelity and see what we kind of get. But I do like this particular kind of yellow, so I'm going to use that. And basically what I can do now is turn my sketch back on. Let me hide this one. And there we go. And on that particular layer, I'm just going to go in and draw this jersey in. So again, same thing. Being careful where my shape kind of goes, just where the shape overlaps. On the outside, you can see I'm just kind of going in whatever kind of happens. It doesn't really matter. because I've made this layer into a clipping mask. And so what you'll see is what will happen is when I fill that, it only sticks to the base layer that's immediately underneath it, right? So it's only going in. If I turn that off, you'll see that all that mess is visible now, but because it's just clipping, it's using that layer as a reference layer. So it's a really easy way to kind of structure all of this. And effectively what I then do is I've got that's my jersey, and then I've got the details, that's also on a clipping layer. So the important thing to remember here is that it looks like this is then clipping to the jersey underneath, but it's not. Any of these ones will clip to the layer that's at the bottom of this stack. And so I do my shading in this same way, right? So now my shading is there. I've got it as 100% opacity on normal. So it's this particular color. And so now I can look at this and go like, all right, well, we've got this kind of like shape because he's kind of twisting his body. So we've got a lot of kind of detail happening there. So there's a lot of kind of things going into here. So I can start to kind of mess around with this and add in this shading. Then I put it on multiply. Again, we've got a kind of a warmer shading here. I could potentially mess with it and make it a little bit more on the cool side if I wanted to, but I want this to be a little bit kind of on the warmer side. And then we've got some basic highlights going in here, and I can hide my sketch layer that I had before. And that's essentially the whole kind of gist of this, right?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's like a cool effect.
It's something that I really like to work with. The thing that I really love about this is once all this is done, is adding these kind of graphic elements to this image and messing around with those kinds of things to see like, what can I get here and what kind of stuff can I do? And like, maybe I could even, let me just delete these two layers. Maybe I could even kind of grab this whole layer and say, all right, I'm going to put a gradient map on top of this group. And that gradient map is going to be, let's say, different colors in here. So we've got like, we've got these kind of tones or this kind of stuff. That could be fun. Let's go with that one. Hit OK, close that. And then on this thing, I can clip it to the bottom. And then on this layer mask that I've got on my thing here, I can go in and kind of almost do what I will kind of be doing a little bit tomorrow, and bringing some of these kind of tones back into this, and you get this really kind of hypergraphic kind of thing that you would not normally get just by kind of drawing normally, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you can get some really, really, really cool effects happening on here with these particular kind of techniques. So again, the crux of this, that's pretty cool. I like the blue there. That's not too bad.
We will need to wrap up, otherwise we won't get to say our goodbyes. But do you want to give a bit of a tease? That was awesome, by the way. I was just kind of watching along with that one. I think it's a really good image to have chosen with that much like motion, like and movement and everything. And I think making it super stylized, like you're kind of giving permission to kind of, as you said, like really like narrow depth of field, like stretch out an image. And I think contrary to most illustration things you'll see, as you said, you don't need a Wacom, like you don't need a stylus of any kind, which I think is really cool for people that want to, you know, just have a go at doing some illustration, doing some really graphic kind of stuff. So that's always cool. Yeah, really, really cool. Do you want to give a quick little teaser of what is tomorrow? We're back again tomorrow with some more stuff.
So tomorrow I will be talking about this particular style. So this is going to be, we're going to start with a silhouette and we're going to do what's called carving out. So we're going to start with an all black silhouette and you just erase instead of like, we're basically drawing with the eraser. And then I'm going to show kind of how to do this kind of collage-y. This is a very like, there's an artist called Tristan Eaton who does some amazing work with this kind of stuff. This is a very much me trying to like replicate his style in this kind of comic book way. But so we'll look at kind of different techniques and this sort of thing in a kind of a simpler way. So that's for tomorrow.
Nice.
Double episode. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'll be back tomorrow. So same time, it's 12 o'clock. here, but it'll be a different time wherever you're tuning in around the world. But tune in tomorrow for more Photoshop, beginner aim stuff. I think you said it gets a little bit more complicated tomorrow, but not too complicated.
Yeah.
Still beginner friendly. So come and check it out. Thank you everyone for being with us. And thank you, Jeremy, for taking us through. Those were two like really amazing kind of effects. I really love that.
Pleasure.
All right, everyone. See you tomorrow on Adobe Live.